Hello and welcome to the Behind the Stripes webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, Missouri coming off their final non-conference game of the season. They beat Miami of Ohio 51-13, and nothing much went wrong in the game. Maybe the only interesting thing to come out of the game was what happened in the fourth quarter, which was Missouri and Gary Pinkel kind of being so bent on not scoring, that with 11 minutes left in the game, he's having James Franklin intentionally not score, just run four quarterback sneaks in a row. What was your thought on that?
Well, it kind of fits Pinkel's philosophy on this. We've seen him do this before, at least in the non-conference part of the season, where he doesn't want to appear to be beating up on these teams that they're beating by a wide margin anyway. I don't think he cares as much against Nebraska or someone like that. But it was a little strange that with, I think, 10 minutes were left in the game, and he's calling these quarterback sneaks. What he really wanted, he explained later, was he wanted Franklin to be running the offense in the middle of the field where he could run Missouri's plays and see how he does. But once they got down to the goal line, he didn't want him to score. He thought that if they would just turn it over there quickly, then Miami of Ohio would get the ball and then give it to Missouri back, and then they can get it back in the middle of the field and they could run their offense. Well, it doesn't always work like that, and it didn't work like that in that game. So instead, you're stuck with that, and you're left with some questions like, why even do that if you're going to play this true freshman quarterback to get him some game experience? What's the point of just calling a bunch of quarterback sneaks? And in a way, it almost looks like you're going out of your way so much not to humiliate your opponent that you're kind of humiliating them a little bit more by drawing more attention to it. And sometimes I think coaches overanalyze a little bit how they're perceived in these situations by the other coach and by other programs, or maybe even by the fans. I remember 2 years ago, Missouri goes down to Texas, just gets hammered the whole game. Texas puts their backup quarterback in. He throws a 50-yard touchdown pass with 5 minutes to go, up by over 30 points at that point. I don't remember there being this outcry of how unsportsmanlike it was of Mac Brown to do at that point. He had his backups in. It's still the losing team's job to stop him. So I think people overanalyze, and I think in this case maybe Pinkel did. At some point, too, you kind of owe it to these fans who'd like to see this guy play. There's 11 minutes left. If it's 1 minute or two, I can understand that, but there's still 11 minutes of the game left. They want to see what this young guy can do, and he was just taking sneaks at that point.
I think Pinkel's heart was in the right place too. I think he's thinking more along the lines of, when people around the country see this score, we don't want to embarrass their coach. Personally, I would say, as long as you're not just leaving your starters in and throwing the ball around, you let the guys who are backups who worked hard play. You let guys who you want to get better play. I mean, I think you kind of got to think of yourself more. You got to worry more about what you're going to do next year and the next year than what Miami of Ohio is doing.
Sure.
So I guess I would probably have just let them run the offense and let the chips fall where they may on that.
You ended up almost spending more time doing that to where you didn't give yourself a chance to get the ball back and run your offense. So.
Yeah, you've been better off just intentionally fumbling the snap if you wanted to do that.
Sure.
Let's look back on the non-conference schedule. They're 4-0. Obviously, they didn't play very stiff competition. What are your impressions maybe of Missouri? In what ways have they surprised you or not for the first 4 games?
Well, they had the big curveball thrown at them with the Derek Washington situation, and I think all things considered with Missouri's running game in particular, not so much the passing game, but the running game, I think they've made do with what they have, and they've gone with the committee approach. Their top 4 tailbacks are collectively averaging 7 yards a carry. I think that's pretty good. I think they've gotten a lot out of them. I think they could probably even get more out of them. They leaned on the run this last week. We'll see if that works as well against speedier, more talented, bigger, stronger Big 12 defenses. I'm not so sure. But I think that was a positive for Missouri, that they didn't just implode and they didn't totally give up on running the ball, at least not this last week.
Although one problem isn't that they just were averaging 7 yards. It was like they got a ton in 2 games and basically little. So you worry, if you're a Missouri fan, is this an offense that can run the ball when they want to, as opposed to when the other team is letting them?
And that's always kind of been the case with this offense anyway. I think the passing game was erratic at times. Blaine Gabbert, I think, can play better than he did in stretches, especially that San Diego State game. But, they're still trying to identify their playmakers there. I think they need to get a third receiver involved, and Jarrell Jackson you would think would be that guy, but he missed the last game with another injury. So I don't think they're as good as they can be throwing the ball by any means. Defensively, they're getting a lot of takeaways. That's been the biggest difference from a year ago. Be interesting to see if they can continue that when they're playing better offenses, playing much more explosive offenses like they will in the Big 12. But on the other hand, Missouri hasn't played with its full complement of players on defense in a single game yet this year. They were always losing or missing at least one key guy. They were without Will Ebner for a couple games. They've been without Alden Smith now for a game, been without Jasper Simmons and Luke Lambert for 3 games each. So when they have the best 11 out there, we'll see if they can play even a little bit better. But the defense is kind of what I expected after these 4 games. They weren't facing great offenses, and the one positive is they're turning the ball over.
One question we had going into the season was whether any of these receivers could make big plays. I think that has been a pleasant surprise. TJ Moe, obviously, when he needed to get yards after the catch against San Diego State, did it.
Right.
Michael Agnew has kind of been a revelation. They haven't gotten the ball as much as I thought they would to Jarrell Jackson and to a lesser extent West Camp. So it's become maybe a little too focused on those 2 guys I first mentioned. I guess that would probably behoove them to spread it out a little bit more. But I think TJ Moe certainly and Agnew have been a really pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
And I think Everett's been pretty good. The first game I thought he was getting out of the pocket more than he needed to. He corrected that. I haven't noticed that the next few games. So he's been pretty solid. I think he's still their best offensive player.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I just think that he's talented enough that he can play a little bit better than what we see, more consistent, not make some of those mistakes like he did against San Diego State.
Okay, entering Big 12 play, what has caught your eye about Big 12? Any teams that radically different than what you thought they were going into the season?
Well, I think you start off with Nebraska. They had the hiccup last week against an FCS team, but that was kind of their San Diego State game. They didn't play their best, but in their other games they looked really impressive offensively, and that's what the one thing you wondered about them. Could they have any sense of offense after really struggling last year? And they've really been one-dimensional for the most part, but that dimension's been pretty good. They're averaging over 310 rushing yards a game. They've got a dual-threat quarterback and Taylor Martinez. Last week he looked like more of a single-threat quarterback because he didn't throw the ball very well. But, they've I don't want to say they've restored order in the Big 12 North by any means, but if they have just half an offense a year ago, they're a lot better team than they were, and they were pretty good by the end of the year. So I still think it's their division to win, but they did look a little vulnerable a week ago. And then I think if you look at Texas, the huge surprising loss to UCLA, they still just don't have much of an offense, which I don't understand how you get all those great recruits down there and they just can't get any kind of running game going. They've got a rookie quarterback in Garrett Gilbert, but he's been inconsistent at times. So they definitely look beatable in the South. But Oklahoma, the team that you would expect to going into the season be the best team in that division, at least I did, they've looked erratic at times too. They've had 2 very close wins over Utah State and Cincinnati. Defensively, they're last in the Big 12 in a couple different categories, which you wouldn't really expect from a Bob Stoops team. So I don't know if there's that great elite superpower in the Big 12 yet this year. You've still got several undefeated teams. But when they start playing each other, is 1 or 2 going to emerge to be a bona fide national title contender? I'm not sure yet.
It might almost be Nebraska, the way their schedule sets up. They get Texas at home, they get Missouri at home. Those are their 2 toughest probably opponents they got to play. And that would be a matter of if they do what we think they will be favored to do anyway, going and winning the Big 12 championship game, and they could be an undefeated and it would be an undefeated team that you'd probably have some questions about, but I think their road is maybe the clearest of anyone.
Yeah, another team to watch is Kansas State. They're 4-0. They've pulled the rabbit out of the hat a few times with three wins that are less by 9 points or less, and I think you look at coaching for that one. They've done a pretty good job. They don't have much at quarterback, but they've got a great running back in Thomas, and Bill Snyder is doing it again. But they look like a team, though, that could win the division maybe or go 6-6. You just don't know.
Yeah, they started pretty well last year. The other thing to watch with them, there's such a kind of a one-man team offensively. He gets the ball so much, he could get beaten down pretty good by November. I thought last year when Missouri played them, he was nothing special by that point.
Right.
He'd just taken a lot of hits.
Yeah.
Lastly, I know Missouri fans have taken to complaining about Missouri's schedule, non-conference schedule, but it's really not just Missouri. I think it's become kind of an epidemic nationwide. Last week, if you look at it, there was maybe one good non-conference matchup, and that was Oregon State against Boise State. Just nobody is playing anyone anymore. What are some solutions you think that could change this? Because I think it's it's not good. I don't think anybody could say this is good for the sport the way things have gone.
Right. Well, first of all, I think they should go back to the rule where the FCS wins don't count towards bowl eligibility. Everybody's playing these FCS teams. You're seeing some score some upsets every couple weeks, but I think they should just go back to that because then teams would have less incentive to play them. I think it would be nice if they could eliminate 10 or 12 bowl games also, just because, in a way that might make teams, have less incentive to play tough schedules. But again, maybe we change the incentives for bowls anyway, and wouldn't just be whoever gets to 6-6 can play in a bowl. It's going to be more consideration put to who you actually played and who you actually beat there too. I think maybe, and this will never happen, but make some rule where you take a handful of bowl games, 10 or 12, the elite bowl games, not just the BCS bowl games, and say, hey, if you want to play in these, you have to play at least 2 BCS conference schools in your non-conference part of the schedule. That's a pipe dream that will never happen, but just make some kind of incentive to actually playing some of these games that mean something, that are the highlight premier games every weekend. We're just not seeing many. September 11th weekend, there was about half a dozen that were really good matchups, but those are so much have become the exception to the rule in college football and have made this month of September just almost irrelevant nationally. So I wish they could do something, but it's all about bringing in crowds to your home games, and it doesn't really matter who you play for a lot of these programs. There was a really good column in the Chicago Tribune a couple days ago about how the Big Ten schools, like most other conferences, are just feasting on these bad opponents, and they really don't care because at Penn State, over 100,000 people showed up to see Penn State play Kent State last week because they don't really care. The fans they're not as interested to who you're playing as long as you got a full house and you're making a lot of money. It just doesn't matter at the end of the day.
And the coaches have figured out, at least the ones in the BCS conferences have figured out, it doesn't matter enough in the way the BCS is figured. If you're from a BCS conference school and you go undefeated, you're going to play in a national title game regardless of who you play in the non-conference schedule, unless there's 3 undefeated teams like we saw one year where Auburn got left out. So they don't have any incentive, and the teams that do have an incentive are your WAC teams, your Mountain West teams like Boise, and nobody wants to play them. I mean, give Oregon State all the credit in the world. They played the 2 toughest non-BCS, and they lost both. And I think if you want to change it, you can A, change your computer formulas so you're weighing strength of schedule much more heavily, and B, just emphasize to human voters, let's stop voting Missouri into the top 25 if they choose not to play a hard schedule, even if they're undefeated. Put UCLA in there, who at least is trying to play somebody good and split with their BCS conference opponents. You know, I would rather see teams get rewarded for that. And then as the season goes on, if UCLA turns out to be a dog and Missouri's good, fine. But I think at this point in the season, you reward the teams that actually went out and tried to play good opponents.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. After we've solved college football's problems, now you're going to answer a question from a reader.
We've got one viewer mail question from Michael Diver, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but he wanted to know about Missouri's running game against Miami. Was it more of these long developing kind of plays, or was it a little bit something different? And what do you think about the future, the next step of Missouri's running game? Well, it was mostly the same. You saw some, they appear to be a little more quick hitting when a guy like Henry Josie takes a handoff, and especially when he's running behind another back, Devin Moore that's back there blocking. They just have that element of quickness at the point of attack that you don't always get with a Devin Moore, and you didn't always get with Derek Washington either in this offense. I'm still kind of skeptical if those plays are going to work against the Oklahomas, against teams with a lot of speed on defense, Nebraska obviously. But we'll find out. Because I don't see Missouri really their running game evolving to some other form, into Big 12 play. This is what they run. They run,
and have been for about 8 years.
The last couple of years. So yeah, I don't think much is going to really change overnight. It's just a matter of blocking and a matter of those backs being a little more elusive and quicker. And I think they do have some quick backs, but are they quick enough against really fast defenses? We'll find out soon enough.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Behind the Stripes webcast.